We now determine the relative and absolute extrema for the function g of t equals e power t minus t with the domain negative 1 comma 1. So first we have to determine the critical point of the function. We obtain the critical point by setting up this equation equals 0, that is the first derivative equals 0, and solving for t. So let's find the derivative of the function g of t, that is g prime of t, and this equals the derivative of e power t is e power t minus the derivative of t is 1, and we have to set this up equal to 0. So therefore I replace g prime of t equals 0, and this equals e power t minus 1. Adding 1 to both sides and solving for e power t, we get this equation e power t equals 1, or otherwise we see that t equals 0, because only when t equals 0, e power t is 0, that is e power 0 is 1. So the solution or the critical point of this function g of t is t equals 0. Now we determine the function value at this point t equal to 0. So let me copy the g of t, and this equals e power t minus t. So from this we are going to find the value of the function at this critical point, that is g of 0, and this equals replace t by 0, we get e power 0 minus 0, and this equals e power 0 is 1, 1 minus 0 equals 1. Now we will also have to determine the function values at the two endpoints, that is at negative 1 as well as at positive 1. So let's determine that. Therefore, we get g of t, or here we are finding g of minus 1. This equals e power negative 1, replace t by negative 1, and then negative of negative 1. And so this gives e power 1, negative 1 is 1 over e, and the negative of negative 1 is positive 1. And if we plug this into the calculator and determine its numerical value, we approximately get 1.368. This is rounded to three decimal places. Let's also find the value of the function at t equals positive 1. That is t equal to 1. We get g of 1, and this equals e raised to the power of 1 minus replace t by 1. So it is e power 1 minus 1. This equals e minus 1. We put this into the calculator and we get approximately 1.718. This is the decimal approximation of this expression e minus 1. We can tabulate all these values and determine the relative and absolute extrema. So I'm going to tabulate these values. That is the value of the function at the critical point as well as at the endpoints. Let's say this is t and this is g of t. So we have to find the values at three values, negative 1, 0, and 1. At negative 1, it is 1.368. At 0, that is at the critical point, it is 1. So we put 1 here. And at 1, it is 1.718. And from this table, the lowest is the relative minimum and the highest is the global maximum. So here we see that the lowest happens at 0 comma 1. So therefore this 0 comma 1 is the relative minimum or the global minimum. We see that G has relative minimum at 0 comma 1. Also this is also the global minimum. G has, otherwise we say this as absolute minimum at 0 comma 1, and the maximum value from this table is the global or the absolute maximum. We see that 1.718 is the maximum out of these three values, so we consider that as the absolute maximum. G has absolute maximum at 1 comma 1.718, and thus we have determined the relative and absolute extrema of the function g of t.